Okay, we're good now? Okay. All right, so we can go ahead and get started. This is the committee meeting for neighborhood preservations. And I was trying to see who was all on the line as far as counselors. I do see Counselor Geathers, Counselor Schultz, President Hudson, Counselor Driscoll, Counselor Green, and Counselor Peniagua and Counselor Caldwell. I hope I didn't miss anybody else. I'm on my phone, so I'm like scrolling through the screens. Okay. And as you can see, I'm working from home. And my dog is crying in the background, so I'm gonna mute on and off so y'all don't hear her. She's upset because she has to be in the crate right now. So we're gonna go ahead and get started. I don't know. Sorry. I'm not sure who's actually running the meeting. Sharon, is it gonna be Pam or do you have someone else starting it off?
It will be the MBS team starting with our design team. So Ashley, just first of all, I'd just like to say thank you, Councilor Allen, for scheduling this committee meeting. It gives us an opportunity to present to the council prior to tomorrow's study session, so I appreciate that. Ashley, you're on.
Thanks, Sharon. Share. All right, can everyone see the screen? All right, good morning, everyone. My name is Ashley Walton. I am an architect and project manager with Urban Design Associates, and we are working with MBS, Cormac Baron Salazar, the developer, on this Connecting the New 15th Ward project. Move into here. So I think one of the first things that something that you may have heard or may have gone around at this point is hearing about this CNI grant. And what is CNI? What is Choice Neighborhoods? So the Choice Neighborhoods program is HUD's signature place-based initiative for investing in neighborhoods. So it's essentially HUD saying that they would make an investment in a community in order to seed other money to come in from other aspects and from other points of leverage. So this implementation grant, which is the grant that we would be applying for, provides up to $50 million. And that's an exciting change to the program, which used to provide up to 35 million. So because of that, people are very excited. And as always, the program is very competitive. So this highly competitive program, because it is seed money from HUD, it also is really time bound. So it has a 6-year timeline to implement. So whatever we start, we need to make sure is complete within that 6 years. 70% of the funds is aimed toward new housing, 15% toward neighborhood projects, and 15% toward people-based projects. And that's because this CNI program has 3 primary components: people, neighborhood, and housing. And so that really focuses on, when it talks about housing, it's talking about mixed income housing. For people, supportive programs and services to help people thrive. And for neighborhood, programs and services that connect neighborhoods together and create an inspiring and exciting, transformative place to live. So another aspect of this neighborhood and of this team is that it's looking at this defined neighborhood as a purpose-built community. And purpose-built community, the core of that is a community quarterback organization. So an organization that's embedded in the community to help advance the goals of the community as a whole. And the Purpose-Built Communities program has 3 primary pillars. So mixed income housing, the cradle to college pipeline, and community wellness. And we find that these 3 pillars dovetail really well with the components of choice. So for mixed income housing, it's focusing on having market rate and mixed income housing mixed in together. For the people component, it's focusing on education, especially what they call the cradle to college pipeline, as well as for adult education, college, and career readiness. And from that community wellness perspective, focusing on a lot of those aspects of the neighborhood. So parks, recreation, connectivity, local business support, and different economic supports. So those 3 pillars of purpose-built communities dovetail really well with the components of choice. So choice has a tight timeline. And so part of the reason why there is so much excitement and why there is so much effort behind what's going on right now is that there is a submission date for February 15. After that submission deadline, 5 to 6 months later, there is site visits for the shortlisted communities. And then after that, selections 4 to 6 weeks later. This is all based on previous choice timelines that we've seen before. It may be a little different than this, just given the state of everything. And because right now, the notice of funding came out later than we've seen in the past. So the timeline may shift, but this is what we've seen in the past. One of the important components of both choice neighborhoods and purpose-built communities is to have a defined neighborhood boundary. And this can be challenging because neighborhoods are very rarely defined with a boundary. So really, when we're looking at where this line came from, this dashed black line that's around the neighborhood here, it's a combination of what we hear from residents, what can put the neighborhood in a most advantageous position to be positioned for this funding, and also a mix of not just the public housing residents, but also the residents that are a little bit further to the south. And so that's really where this boundary came from. So when we look at that overall process and what's happened so far, this really started way back as early as 2016 in the original preferred concept plan. But instead of just taking that preferred concept plan, what was really important is to engage a new process that really focuses on the residents and the folks who are there right now. And so a planning process was kicked off in March, April of 2021, in which there were kickoff meetings with residents at each of the primary housing sites, as well as a series of listening meetings and stakeholder meetings for both residents and wider stakeholders. And then we looked at beginning to test some of those ideas that we were hearing from residents for these aspects of people, neighborhood, and housing. And so that really usually happens in these 3 big steps: listen, test, and decide. So when we look at that timeline on a month-by-month basis, we can start to see that really in early April, we started to have those resident kickoff meetings, stakeholder meetings, all of those in the early spring and summer, and then moving into testing in the late summer and early fall, where we started to refine the plan. And then deciding, we're starting to continue to have these meetings with stakeholders and with key individuals to get the plan to be from what we heard from residents, refined, and able to be a successful grant application. So looking at what we heard and where the elements of the plan came from, we can look at it with, we were starting to ask these major questions to both residents and stakeholders. So we started talking about what are the strengths of your neighborhood? Some of the big ones: access to transportation, proximity to downtown, proximity to the hospitals and universities, and the fact that there were great neighbors and people who people depended on. But then the weaknesses, some of the safety issues like crime, traffic issues, non-residents disrupting the community, and trash and litter. But there were also a lot of opportunities. So these were ideas and dreams that residents had that they mentioned to us. So community spaces with classes, grocery store and other access to health, fresh food, local businesses and support for them, cameras and lighting for people to feel safer, jobs and education support, and different in-unit amenities like laundry, more space, storage, that sort of thing. So these were all dreams and opportunities that residents mentioned to us, something that they would like to see. From what we heard, and this will be further refined as we get into some of the neighborhood needs assessment surveys, which are a critical component of the choice application, we can start looking at what are these goals and objectives for these 3 components of the choice neighborhood program: people, neighborhood, and housing. So when we look at some of these goals for neighborhood, having amenities for children and adults, access to fresh, healthy food, workforce training, just to name a few, and then for housing, to make sure that the primary purpose is to prevent displacement, increase choices for families, and have successful mixed income housing. And for people, focusing on education, early learning, health, a place to age in place, and really focusing on a holistic community transformation. So when we get into what that housing plan actually looks like, it's important to note that there are 3 primary redevelopment areas. And this is partially because of the significant project that is happening with I-81 and the slight uncertainty around the exact timeline for that. So those 3 parts are looking at the Choice redevelopment area, the I-81 redevelopment area, and the Central Village redevelopment area, with the renovations for AOT happening at the same time as the Choice redevelopment area. So when we look at what's there now, McKinney Manor has approximately 75 units and Pioneer Homes has about 599 units. If we focus in on the choice redevelopment area, it's those 75 units of McKinney Manor and 218 units of Pioneer Homes. So that's 293 units of public housing that would be impacted by the choice redevelopment area. So looking at what would go back in its place, in order to look at successful mixed income housing, it's important to look at a higher density than what is currently there. And that helps from both the idea of having increased options of mixed income housing, but also in talking about where the neighborhood is from an urban design perspective. So just north of East Adams Street, which is the uppermost street in this drawing, that is really the southern boundary of downtown Syracuse. And so looking at how to interface whatever this new development is with existing downtown Syracuse, that drove some of the urban design decisions. Many of the other decisions were driven by what we're hearing from residents in terms of what they want to see, and we can get into that in a moment. But this is looking at 611 units of mixed income housing with a primary focus of the 293 replacement units being replaced one-to-one based on family need. So every family that is in the current 293 units that would be replaced with this plan would be able to return and have first right of return. So this would happen in approximately 5 phases. So looking at phase 1 up at the corner of East Adams and State, phase 2, which is at the empty Burt Street parking lot down between Burt and State, phase 3 between State and Townsend, phase 4 back up at East Adams between East Adams and McBride, and phase 5 between Townsend and McBride. So when we look at that program and dig into what that actually starts to look like by numbers, we can have a breakdown.
Can you go back a little bit to the last slide? I'm sorry.
Yes.
Phase 2, I'm just trying to see exactly where that is. So is that AOT?
No, AOT is just south of that. So this is the empty lot that's across the street from AOT.
Okay, got you. Thank you.
No problem. So when we start to look at some of those numbers for that, we can start looking at the breakdown between 1, 2, 3, and 4 bedroom units, as well as units by type, because there would be a mix of different building types that would be in this mixed income housing redevelopment. So you would see townhouses, you would see walk-up buildings, and you would see larger corridor buildings to allow for elevators. And so one of the big things that we talk about during the resident meetings is to make sure that there are lots of different choices for families so that there's different types of housing based on the needs of individual families. So when we start to look at that I-81 redevelopment area, that adds another 793 units to a long-term vision for what this would look like. And so looking at that all together, it's about 1,404 units. The choice redevelopment area is selected strategically, one, to avoid the long-term impacts of the I-81 housing or the I-81 redevelopment that would be happening, but also to focus on the fact that that 6-year timeline for choice is a really critical component of that. So whatever we start has to be finished in that 6-year timeline. And so to make sure that that can successfully be completed within the bounds of the grant application. So looking a little bit deeper at that phasing, the phases 6 through 12, or the I-81 redevelopment area, would happen at a later date. And we can get into some of the specifics of dates a little bit later as well. So for an idea of what some of that new housing would look like, one of the big things that we heard is making sure that there is that mix. So in addition to some of the larger walk-up and corridor buildings, there would be smaller townhouse buildings in order to have that range. So this is an example of the street that would be it would be a new street that would be created just south of East Adams Street that shows many of the townhouse and walk-up buildings. So the people component of the plan is really focusing on programs and services for the residents of the target housing. And they're the primary focus, but it's wider, that's looking at the entire neighborhood boundary as well. So it focuses on family support services and the ongoing engagement of residents throughout this entire process, as well as the development of resident leaders. So there are 3 components to the people plan, which focuses on health and wellness, economic mobility, and education. And USI, longtime partners with McCormick Barron, would be the implementer of this people strategy. Looking a little deeper into the neighborhood element, so the impact of I-81 can't be really understated here. The current selective alternative that would modify I-81 and Almond Street would impact 4 blocks of Pioneer homes. And right now, DOT has indicated that there would be some improvements to Wilson Park as part of this long-term plan. We're not sure what they exactly would be, but that's something that's a key component of this. And then there's an interest in ways to bridge across that I-81 Almond Street redevelopment, and hopefully the changes to the plan itself would encourage a true neighborhood grid alternative that would allow for people to be able to feel safe crossing the street at ground level in terms of traffic movement, the size of the lanes, etc. But if not, looking at other alternatives, including and not limited to something like a pedestrian bridge over key components of the redevelopment. Another aspect of the Choice Neighborhood Program, especially focusing in on the neighborhood side of that, are what are called critical community improvements. And as a partner, Blueprint 15 has really been focusing on that long-term neighborhood plan and what those critical community improvements could look like. And so it might be some, it might be most of these, but looking at the EOC Applied Training Lab, commercial real estate development along East Adams Street, homeownership opportunities, universal Wi-Fi / broadband, Children's Rising, which is an early learning YMCA and parent-child play center, and the New Street Linear Park, so connection of green space and park improvements. We'll run through these briefly, and if anyone from Blueprint 15 has additional things they'd like to say about this, please feel free. But jumping into the EOC Applied Training Lab, that's at 100 Montgomery Street, and would focus on career coaching, access to jobs, and training and ongoing case management for residents. And this is where it would kind of be, so to get an idea of how it would impact the area with about a 5-minute walk. Commercial development on East Adams Street, so focusing on first floor commercial space to support minority and women-owned businesses, and focusing on coaching, training, capital, and technical assistance through already existing programs such as the Upstart program in order to fill out that space. Homeownership opportunities, so the mayor's infill strategy, which was already in, even with everything that 2020 had to throw at us, being able to build 6 new homes in 2020, and one former Pioneer Homes residents actually purchased a home. So being able to look long-term at what are some of these homeownership opportunities and strategies, and finding partners to increase access to Wi-Fi and broadband, something that is more than ever a critical infrastructure component where we are today. And then this was an aspect that we talked a lot to residents about. What if we were to have some sort of open gathering space, what could that look like? And that we were looking at lots of different options, including a more centralized version of a park. And what really stuck was this idea of a linear park that would connect Roessler Park to Wilson Park. And so this New Street Linear Park would focus on family and friends gathering spaces, community garden and orchard. Residents in particular loved the idea of fruit trees. Play spaces, covered seating areas, and being able to focus on a lot of these amenity aspects that residents said they really wanted to see. And so here's an image of what that could look like. And then Children's Rising, very exciting, an early learning parent empowerment and engagement center just to the south of the Choice redevelopment area, would really focus on early learning, parent and child play, and health and wellness programming by the YMCA. And so having that integral to the community and in a pretty centralized location, it was really important to residents that not all the amenities were up at East Adams Street, but were really pulled deeper south into the neighborhood. And so Children's Rising, its location is meant to be strategic in that way, as well as being kind of at the heart of what's going on. And here's an image of what that could look like. So our next steps and where we are now is the securing of partnerships and leverage. So there's a lot of letter writing and confirming and discussion going on right now. submitting that choice application on February 15, and then working on implementation with or without the choice grant. This is a long-term neighborhood vision that is not only wrapped up into the choice grant. So just making sure that there is a long-term strategy that facilitates implementation in the long term. There's a current project website, engagetheteam.com/East Adams. This will very shortly be undergoing a large revamp as we're updating it with a lot of this information that we were able to share with residents last week. So it will soon be very different than it is right now if you go to it. But that is the current project website. And then I will turn it over if there is, Pam, if there's anything that you want to add to that, or if there's anyone from Blueprint 15 who wants to add anything.
No, I think you set the framework well, and would open it up to Blueprint 15. And then if there's anything else they want to add, then to any questions.
I serve two hats. One deputy mayor. Also, I serve as the president of Blueprint 15. So our organization is extremely excited about this project. The opportunity, we continue to engage our Raquan and his amazing team, continue to engage the tenants. They are, again, receiving so much information and taking it like champs and giving us very valuable feedback. Unless there's any other comments from Blueprint, I think what we're prepared to is answer questions from the council. Councilor Allen.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the presentation, and thank you, Deputy Mayor. So we'll just open up. I do see we have Neighborhood Preservation Committee members on. If you guys want to go first with any questions, and then we can just open it up to everybody.
Let me go, Council.
Okay, go ahead. Yep.
So the first one is for applying for this grant, and when we talk about leverage, are there city resources that'll be required? Is it in kind, or what would be the commitment from the city for this?
Yes, Councilor. Requirement of the application is substantial matching dollars from a wide variety of stakeholders, city being one of them. Mike Collins, could you tell us where we landed? And our commitment is based on projects that we intend to do in this footprint. So we can't just say city match overall, but particularly in the footprint. And so these are projects that we, Joe Gorsuch, who's on the call here today, we asked all of our departments what projects were in the queue already, either in our capital plan or projected through TIP, for example, that we can use in the project. Unfortunately, we found out that we could not use investments we've made recently as this year and last year in the project. It had to be anything going forward. Joe or Michael, do you remember what that bottom line number is?
Yeah, happy to speak to it, Deputy Mayor. So, councilors, when we submitted the letter, we had landed on just shy of $30 million. The letter in front of you has got $29,991,000 in it. We're identified more than that since we've submitted the letter. Specifically, what this is we have talked with all the department heads about what we expect to spend within Census Tract 42 and Census Tract 53 over the period of this grant, over the next 6 years. So this isn't a, hey, we're going to pull from one part of the budget and have to figure that out later. This is a recognition of the fact that we've done a lot of long-term planning and we know what we're able to do and plan to do within these two census tracts. This includes a $1.5 million allocation, which ends up being $250,000 a year from CDBG within that within those two census tracts. We currently allocate over that on an annual basis within these two census tracts. So again, it's not throwing everything up in the air. It's identifying just due to the good long-term planning that we've done, how much money we're going to spend in these two tracts.
Commissioner Collins.
I'm sorry, I've got questions from both Councilor Green and Allen.
Go ahead, Green.
So most of them are already identified in the capital plan. So,
I already identified as ongoing expenses or upcoming planned expenses. Yes.
Counselor, I got one more, but I'll go to you and then I can.
You're fine. Go ahead.
So the other one I was just going to say, I mean, I think Syracuse, one of our struggles is we're a very car dependent city, and pretty much everyone needs to drive to get to jobs or to get to stores. And this could be one of the few neighborhoods where it's truly possible to live in Syracuse without a car and walk places, walk to jobs, take a bicycle. But to what degree are we trying to accomplish that through the design, particularly the streetscape and bike lanes and those?
Yeah, so I can speak a little bit to that, but others on the team are able to speak to it more directly. Counselor, I'll say is that this is absolutely recognizing that it's a comprehensive neighborhood redesign. We've had a lot of conversations around how much parking space is actually needed around the non-residential areas. What does the ability to be able to walk or bike look like throughout the neighborhood, but also as Ashley Walton noted, when we get into the next phase after this, what does that look like with the redesign of 81 and coming into a true community grid, and how do we make sure that there's safety involved in that? And frankly, I think that our planning and work related to this really helps with making sure that that gets implemented correctly as well.
Thanks,
Also, I also add that the design features the ability for mixed use space as well. So the opportunity for in best case scenario for neighborhood businesses to be able to plant themselves within that community and provide amenities that may not be there right now.
Thank you, Councilor.
Okay, you're welcome. I just had one quick question. It was relative to the CDBG funding. It would be out of this year's allocation, Commissioner Collins?
Excellent question, Councilor Allen. No, we are allowed to do that over the 6-year period of the grant. So it would be $250,000 a year. If there's a year in which we have a reduced allocation, assuming that we get the award, then we would be allowed to reduce the commitment to that neighborhood by the same percentage amount that the award was reduced.
Okay. All right, thank you. Any other questions or comments?
When you had talked about the kind of the economic development piece of encouraging minority and woman-owned businesses, do we have any kind of ballparks on, to get a little deeper into that, into those kind of projections of how much how many businesses do we think will be developed in that corridor? What kind of economic activity would be expecting in that growth?
Well, I'll ask the design team as you looked at the plan, kind of it's spurred out amongst the plan where these mixed use opportunities come. Councilor Driscoll, the answer that really is going to be to try as close as possible be in line with what the residents say the amenities that are missing right now need to be. I mean, one thing that has been talked about, of course, that continues to be talked about in multiple neighborhoods are grocery stores. However, we all know practically that in neighborhoods, large grocers have been downsizing. So what is the opportunity for a smaller grocery amenity with fresh products that can take place, even a food co-op potentially in the neighborhood, to meet those amenities? I know during the community feedback phases, multiple meetings, one of the amenities that was clearly said is that it's a pain in the neck that people don't have a laundry facility. So the design team looked to address that by putting laundry facilities in the units. So as we continue to look at what those commercial or retail, it really will be to really target in on the areas that the tenants and the residents in that community say are missing.
So Sharon, since you said that, who's going to have the final say as to which businesses are able to be in that particular neighborhood?
So it will be a lease agreement. We are bringing through the other thing that's on your agenda is that partnership agreement with the city, with all the stakeholders to get the retail spaces completed. It ultimately is the decision of the owner, but with significant influence from the stakeholders, and particularly the city of Syracuse.
Okay, because it just makes me a little worried. Like, what if the owner wants a Trader Joe's to come in the area? That may not be, I mean, I love Trader Joe's, but that may not be the best decision for the neighborhood if people don't usually shop at those type of stores. So would they still take into consideration uh, the people actually in the neighborhood saying, no, we don't want that. We want Aldi's, or we want a mini Wegmans or Tops, or whatever the grocery store will be.
Councilor Ellen, one of the, and I saw Pam's hand, but one of the questions that came from a couple stakeholder meetings was the need for similar to the big table for 81 and similar to how we're moving forward with the suggestion to the recommendation to the DOT for the land trust community organization, really giving some oversight. Also for 81 community oversight through the SEP 14 application. That theme has been consistent in this neighborhood through all this development, whether it's this project or it's the 81 project. Pam has shared with us in response to that concern and request from neighborhood stakeholders that is actually the strategy that has been used in other communities. And so that body of individuals works with the development team, works with the city of Syracuse in the same fashion as all those other community stakeholder groups that have been asked to be established to oversee these major developments to ensure resident and stakeholder feedback. Pam, is there anything you want to add?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in about the MBE, WBE investments on the housing construction. There'll be a number of different opportunities, whether it's through the neighborhood investments that will be built, and that will be led by the neighborhood implementation entity, which is the city of Syracuse, or the housing investment entity, which would be MBS, redeveloping the housing. We have a term sheet that exceeds the city goals that outlines that we comply with 15% of all of our contracts going to MBE and then another 15% to WBE. So there's a guideline that we are to follow and account for, and those guidelines are set forth on the housing construction as well as on the design or any soft contracts that we have. And then if I can just mention on, I think it was mentioned who would decide who goes into the ground floor of the space. So in a number of the multifamily buildings, part of the zoning has a commercial activity set aside, and commercial as it relates to zoning. That could be, business incubator space for small businesses. It could be, whatever that space looks like. We would look towards you all, the city, the housing authority, to help us guide how to program that space. That's how we do it in other cities, is really a collective effort. We don't necessarily, I've heard from Sharon, Deputy Mayor, that she doesn't want a Best Buy or so. That's not how we go. We don't go to Las Vegas and try to secure the biggest retailer. We really try to tailor it to the neighborhood and what the neighborhood's looking for. So if Center State has a number of small businesses and they need space, then often what we do in our programming is we don't account for rent, let's say, in the first couple of years, because we know that might be a fledgling business that may not be able to pay rent, but they need space. Or if Upstate Hospital wants a community health clinic and that's something the residents are, aligned with and have a need for, then we program it that way. So it's really kind of coming from your ideas, the community's ideas, and so forth, that help create this space, and we target appropriate from there.
Okay, thank you, Pam.
Also, Councilor Allen, the strategy within the application, again, there are 3 components: neighborhood building, housing, of course, and then the people part. And on the people part, there is the strategy to support all of this movement that's happening in this community around the transition, around workforce, around just social supports and case management. And that project is going to be overseen by Alicia and her team, but this will be a team of individuals, of new hires. These are going to be local people, from a director right through to case management. So it's going to be a great opportunity for stakeholders in this community vested in what's going to happen, particularly with the people in that neighborhood, to ensure that they're provided the supports necessary. And it's not going to be a whole group of outsiders coming in. It's going to be local people in this position. Elisa, did you want to speak at all to that, please?
Yeah, no, I would just reiterate everything you just said, Deputy Mayor. That's absolutely correct. We look to come in and help, fill gaps as we can, but really it's about building on the great work that's already happening and working to best align all of those efforts. And so when it comes to economic development, right, braiding together the residents that might have a dream to start that business, connecting them with the folks that are helping support them to create those business plans and get that going, all the way through then perhaps, right, landing a space in one of the mixed use spaces available. Absolutely. Thanks.
And Councilor Allen, if you don't mind, Meg, could you speak to the Early Learning Center and also on this people focus around education?
Sure. Thank you. And a huge thank you both to Deputy Mayor Owens, Common Council President Helen Hudson, and Councilor Allen. We've been working on this kind of concept around a holistic revitalization of this neighborhood for almost 5 years now. So it is really, everything has kind of been building to this application for CNI. And I do think that because of all the partners around the table, we are really well positioned to hopefully secure this amazing grant from HUD. So just can't thank the city enough for all their leadership on this. So the Early Learning Center, as we have, as you might recall from the purpose-built models that we've been talking about for a while, in many ways, this is also an education strategy for neighborhood redevelopment, which means that we have already been working for the past 3 years with MLK School, Martin Luther King Elementary, that is in the footprint. They have an amazing principal that has been part of purpose-built schools to try to create this kind of STEAM academy and turn around some of the reading and other test scores related. But part of that is that it's great, but as we all know, by the time you get to kindergarten, what have you done for the first 5 years? And we know that early learning development happens so much earlier. So what we're proposing in this footprint, it's very common in other purpose-built communities, is creating an early learning center, 120 slots for children. Priority would be given to the residents in the neighborhood. We would subsidize those, but we would also be eligible to provide other slots for children in the community. So we have already started to look on that path of how we would create that, what our partnerships would look like for that kind of early learning component. But what we're also proposing to put in the 58,000 square foot building that we heard from the residents is a YMCA. 30,000 square feet would be geared, that would also provide opportunities for senior programming, but also surrounding youth after school programming for kids. And then also taking it up into the high school years with other opportunities for work employment through the YMCA. Then lastly, what we're proposing is 12,000 square feet where the Early Childhood Alliance that has become a really wonderful resource in our community, does programming, including Help Me Grow. We also have parent engagement. Saisha Bird works in this neighborhood, that we would also embed the ECA in this facility, and that we would create 10,000 square feet of what's known in Auburn, we've created called the Play Space. Think of like a museum, like a small mini Rochester Strong Museum that kind of meets a parent resource center, but a way for parents from throughout the community, but especially in this neighborhood, to have opportunities for connection, parent bonds, and supports that they also need. So we're really excited about that opportunity. Blueprint 15 will take the lead on fundraising, constructing, and working with the partners, and estimate that the project would be $18 million just to construct.
All right, thank you, Meg. Is she still talking? Okay. Is Bill Simmons on the line? I wanted to see if he wanted to add something to the conversation.
No, we're just, thank you, Councilor Allen, and good morning, everyone. Many of you know, I've known over the years, and having been here at the Housing Authority for the past 15 years, it's been an exciting journey to get to this point where we're really trying to transform the neighborhood with this, along with this I-81 opportunity. And so we've had a great partnership with the city, Blueprint 15, NBS and Urban Strategies. It's a really first-class team putting together a world-class neighborhood. We're just very, very excited about it, and very, very very happy that the Common Council took this up to look at it. And I know over the years, many of the council members have had and been a part of some of our briefings. But we're just really excited about this opportunity for the residents and the community at large.
All right, thank you. One last thing, if there's not any other questions, can someone give us just a walkthrough of time frame? If we were to vote on this on Monday, and the application is submitted, you said by February, can you guys give us just a quick timeline of how this would roll out?
Pam, you want to take that?
Certainly, thank you. So we will submit in February, and usually HUD takes several months to review applications. Ashley, I think we were estimating that potentially a fall notification or late summer notification, that for those that are selected that then go to a site visit. So HUD will select from, let's say, 50 apply, but maybe 5 or 6 or 7 receive a site visit. This may be virtual or in person, and highly recommend, if it's virtual, that we have some elements prepared beforehand that meeting, whether it's filmed elements or so forth, that may bring a clip from the governor, a clip from the state, a clip from the mayor, or whomever that would be an incredible stakeholder showing a commitment to the overall redevelopment effort. It's an all-day event, and you present, and then you're fielded questions by HUD, and they get really into the details. But so that would be for potentially fall, and then shortly thereafter, they would notify applicants who was selected and who was not. Concurrent with this, we'd like to go forward regardless. I think there's phenomenal momentum and investment that has been made to date that we can continue, whether it's start looking at, furthering the designs on the parcels, continuing those discussions with the state home and community renewal department, and seeking resources. So concurrent with waiting to hear from HUD, we just don't want to do nothing, but rather keep this momentum and solicit funding from other sources, the state, lenders, equity investors, and so forth, and then move on with refining architectural plans so that we can be ready if and when there's an announcement to move forward, and so forth. But I would say the good news is when we met with the state, their question was, well, how much do you need if you don't get HUD? And I think that's the best question you could get, because they were willing to come in regardless of the HUD commitment or not, and dive into that and push up their sleeves and say, how can we help in case this doesn't happen? Because as Ashley mentioned, it is so competitive. So that first year, it does take to kind of do the pre-development. We have done phase 1s on all the sites, and we've done a preliminary market study for the overall, but we'd have to dive into by phase a more detailed market study. And then we've also done civil engineer with Bryant Associates to look at public infrastructure and those costs, so that we would understand what it would take to bring in new utilities and upgrade the public infrastructure like roads and sidewalks and so forth. And so some of the groundwork has been done, but we would continue to do that pre-development work. And our time frame with the state, they say once an application is submitted, it takes about a year to close. So we could submit those applications in the next several months, but realizing that it could be, closing in 2023 for the first and potential second phases, concurrent with AOT, also renovation going on at the same time. So it does take time. I think the first year is that pre-development design, securing resources, and then takes about 2 years to build each building. We would stagger the buildings, one, so we disrupt the residents the least, asking them to move in phases rather than move everyone all at once. We find that's just too disruptive. And so we're starting at the East Adams site in part because it's the least occupied, the least dense, and could garner 140 units with the movement of 25 households. And then the Birch Street is a parking lot right now, so that could garner 120 units with no movement of any household. So we can start building those units, and then potentially, as mentioned in the article that came out this morning, about a third of those households impacted by the targeted area could move straight into the new housing. So they're not necessarily moving off-site or within the footprint, maybe to another public housing site, but move once into the new housing is really the goal, is to build first and minimize any relocation that occurs with the residents. But that kind of gives you a time frame that, and I think, Ashley, you have a slide that we can share that outlines the broader kind of next 6 years. But if you think it takes a year for pre-development, 2 years to build, and then you follow that phase by phase, if we push it back maybe 6 to 9 months per phase, that kind of shows you when they could be completed. And that gets you to the 6-year time frame. And then we would look to continue this with the I-81 parcels as well. And I mean the rest of Pioneer that's adjacent to the I-81 construction.
Okay, thank you, Pam. All right, Hogan, you don't have any questions? This is odd.
Councilor Allen, if I may, I also think it's important for the council, as we're looking at this development, there is a place and time right now with HUD around its traditional housing that is really urging this transformation of the existing public housing that we've always known, the original Pioneer homes. And I was hoping Bill can just speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, just a lot of this opportunity was created in large part because of the lack of investment from the federal government in public housing over the past 15 years. And because the Department of Housing and Urban Development didn't see the Congress ever fulfilling that backlog, $70 million backlog nationally of capital improvements for public housing, they created the opportunity for public housing to reposition themselves and use public-private financing for redevelopment. And that was in large part created this opportunity to bring in these types of consultants and transform or reimagine how we do public housing and finance the redevelopment throughout the country, but in Syracuse in particular. And so using dollars from the state and federal dollars, federal government, local municipalities to improve public housing has taken the public housing out of the strict guidelines from the federal government, and again, created these opportunities to really do something different. And you know, part of it was the fact that deconcentration of poverty. You know, in the city of Syracuse in 2018, it was reported that 30% of the residents were in the poverty rate, whereas nationally that number was only 11%. So in looking at how we can perform a deconcentration of poverty, how can we improve the lives of residents as well as to make the physical improvements here, and then, you know, address this, have something that was complementary to this I-81 opportunity, and having both plans run together, I think it's going to be very, very transformative. And so it's very exciting. The residents are excited about the plan, but naturally very anxious because it means it impacts their lives in such a very, very direct way. But I think all the residents know, as well as the Housing Authority, that the path that if we continue to do what we're doing now is unsustainable. The Syracuse Housing Authority For many of you who've been around any length of time, you know that we used to receive 10, $15 million for capital improvements. Since I've been at the Housing Authority, we've been receiving 2 million, 3 million, 5 million. And so we haven't been able really to keep up. All we've been able to do is keep the residents warm. We put roofs over their heads. We put in new windows and fixtures, but the kinds of programming for residents that used to have in the past have been long gone. And this creates an opportunity to really do something that's going to be very impactful for the lives of the residents and something very, very sustainable. This mixed income housing component does a lot of things in a neighborhood, but probably the most important thing that it does, it provides an informal network to help residents move forward. You know, we talk a lot about education opportunity, and we know all that is key for residents to redevelop and improve the lives of residents. We talk about the job opportunity and workforce, but it's really that neighbor-to-neighbor contact. When someone's looking for a job when Upstate has a job opportunity or SU has a job opportunity open, what do we normally do? We just go to our colleagues and friends and say, hey, we got this opportunity to fill right away. But if you live in a neighborhood where there's doctors, there's nurses, and they know that little Mary been living with her in the neighborhood for the past 10 years, and she's graduating from high school, and your neighbor says, well, what is little Mary going to do, or Mary going to do now? And the nurse says, well, we have some opportunities at Upstate. That informal network in the community that really helps create opportunity for people is what this is all about. In addition to all of the structured kinds of opportunities that we creating, job opportunities and financial literacy and early childhood learning, you know, the real network that comes out of having that mixed income and modeling and deconcentrating in poverty, breaking up the super blocks that we have now where a lot of nefarious activities go on. You know, I can go on and on about those things, but we all know what happens when you have concentrated poverty. So it's a really, really exciting opportunity for our residents. And as I said, the community at large. And we just have a world-class team with the City Blueprint 15, MBS, and Urban Strategies. It's a golden opportunity, as well as Pam and Sharon said earlier, New York State wanted to step up to the plate because we're going to need them. As many of you know, this $50 million helps us out in many different ways. But, you know, to transform the complete neighborhood is going to require the resources of the state and federal government. So your support here today and going forward is going to be tremendously helpful and greatly appreciated.
Councilor Allen?
Yes, sir.
I was just wondering, I mean, I commend everybody who's been working on this. Obviously, this would be a transformative project. And you know, I remember Councilor Simmons talking, well, we'd have conversations about that when he was on the council. Last time I was on the council about these issues, and I'm glad everybody's got this foremost in the mind. But what would be really beneficial for me, and Meg mentioned this earlier, is there examples of these purposely built communities? And I mean, we're the only one in New York State, I guess it's signed on, but that we could look at and see how successful they've been in other states, Meg, that you maybe could send us?
Yeah, we could totally do that. So Councilor Hogan, just, you know, there have been other communities. Rochester started this Work Connected Communities, I think it's called, before us, but they have not been able to get network membership into purpose-built communities. So it's not actually that easy to become a purpose-built community. They're very selective because they provide a tremendous amount of free counseling, coaching, and advice in these revitalization efforts. So they're very selective which communities they will work with. So it was a huge kudo to Syracuse to get that. I think I'll turn it over to, we'll make sure that we send you some examples. As you guys know, Raekwon Pride Green is the executive director of Blueprint 15, and I'm sure we can send some that you would be able to look up and research a little bit.
And one other thing, the deputy mayor mentioned something about, you know, obviously the city would be obviously totally 100% behind this, but there would be ways to encourage businesses to relocate through SIDA, obviously. And, you know, I left a county IDA meeting just now, and, you know, obviously we could use pilots programs, sales tax abatements, things like that. And I think that would be really helpful because certainly we use them for bigger companies, and somebody along the lines of a urban type grocery store might benefit from something like that too. So I just wanted to mention that.
Absolutely, Counselor, and Eric Ennis is on the call as well, and I'm sure he concurs with that.
Okay.
Counselor Allen and the rest of the counselors, you have before you for tomorrow's study session 2 pieces of legislation. One is our request to submit this application, and the other is an agreement, partnership agreement that has the city, the housing authority, urban strategies, the school district, and the housing authority. That is a required document of the application. Those relationships have to happen for this thing to go, but we have to codify it officially in a written agreement. So you have that before you as well.
Okay. All right. Thank you to everyone that presented today. And I'll just shoot it out there one last time for any counselors. If you have any questions or comments, you can ask now, or if you think of something when we get off the call, we'll have time tomorrow during the study session. You'll be able to ask more questions if needed. And
I would just ask that the MBS team be available at noon tomorrow, just in case any additional questions come up. Thank you.
Okay. Counselor Gathers?
Yes, I just have one question. I don't know if I heard it correctly or not. But as far as the construction and everything goes with MBEs and MWBs, the whole enterprise, you'll be looking at it to do locally, right? To hire for construction. Is that what I'm hearing? Or
Yes, so there's 2 opportunities, both with MBE, WBEs, but then there's also job and individuals. So separate from the 15% MBE, 15% WBE commitment, there's also a Section 3 program that will be in effect. And that will be part of our construction of all of the buildings. And what's new in July is Section 3 changed. What used to be was 51% of any new hires had to be from the either census tracts or had to be a Section 3 designated, resident. That could be a public housing resident or coming from a zip code from another economic determined zip code. But now it's 25% of all hours. So sometimes subcontractors I found on past jobs could get out of it by saying, well, I don't have any new hires, right? And so they just keep the same crew job after job. And that's really not the intent of the program. But the federal government has changed the guidelines. So of everyone on the job site, 25% will have to be local and from the neighborhood and from Section 3 designation. So meaning that they're at an income or below. So that will ensure that kind of local and that income and that need. So we're going to work strongly with EOC and our other partners so that we get people, and that's what we can do over this next year, is that we may start construction in 2023, but we need to do some trades training, apprenticeship training in 2022 to get those that are interested ready so that they can walk onto a job site, whether it's housing or whether it's on the highway or what have you, and be ready and have that success to thrive in that position. So there's benchmarks set forth in place through this that we will happy report on. And have job fairs along the way with our subcontractors and our general contractors to ensure that there's adequate outreach and that we're being as proactive as possible so that we not only meet these goals, but hopefully exceed them as well.
thank you.
All right. So we can close out if there's no other questions or comments. And like I said, if we do think of something over the evening, we can definitely ask questions tomorrow at the study session, and hopefully this will be ready for Monday for a vote. So with that being said, thank you. Thank you everybody, like I said, that presented, and thank you counselors for joining. And that is all.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, see you guys tomorrow. Bye.